Welcome to Innovating Music, a podcast from the UCLA Herb Alpert School of Music and the UCLA Center for Music Innovation. I'm your host, Dr. Gigi Johnson. Roman Rappak is on two parallel tracks. On one side, he has a new band, Miro Shot, that is creating recorded music to distribute in traditional channels. But on the other side, he is creating music with that band, but specifically through an organization he's created called Mirocolabs, which is an AR/VR content creation studio to create mixed reality experiences with the same music, but in live environments. Please enjoy this episode where Roman talks about what drives him on these parallel tracks, on these interwoven journeys with his new band, and why it's important to build their own systems and processes to create this new type of live and virtual engagement for future audiences. So you are in two camps. You are, or I would say multiple camps. So you are both a continuing, somewhat traditional creator and really in the tech end of things.
That's right.
What are the camps you're in right now? What are the sort of core work you're doing?
The world that we're in, I suppose, is the traditional music label structure, in the sense that we're releasing a record in 2020 and we are a signed band, which means that the implication, I suppose, when you sign a record deal is that it stops being as much of a hobby that it possibly was before, and that you're aiming to put music out using the label structures and for it to reach as many people as possible. So that's what kind of tethers us to the old world, because I think one of the themes of the project and probably of this podcast will be that how do you have one foot in the existing world that you're trying to maybe disrupt, and then another foot in this new exciting world that has got very few rules or modes of best practice.
But at the same time, I would say you're a new and an old foot. So your band, Miro Shot, is still fairly new. When was it formed? Because
we've developed into a company that makes VR experiences for reasons that I'll try and go into later on. We've created a VR experience, which is a live music performance VR experience, which means the audience is seated. The performances last about 10 minutes. So it's an installation. There's a live band playing, so no one wears headphones. All the music is live, and the experience is a live generated VR multiplayer experience. So everyone is going through it at the same time and experiencing the same things. And the experience itself switches between VR and a form of AR or mixed reality, where they can see they're back in the room and they're in reality, and they can see the band, they can see the audience members that are next to them. And there's cameras on board the headset which deliver that part of the experience.
And so how many people are part of that 10-minute experience at a time?
We've done, it varies really, because that's the other thing. We've tried to make it so that it's a modular experience, so we can do different, like a band should be, in my perspective, that you should be able to play very small club shows, and you should be able to play huge festival shows, and you should be able to play private gigs, and you should be able to play record in stores. And with this, for instance, in Hamburg, when we played a show there, it was 3 days that we performed multiple sessions, and it was in a warehouse space in front of about 20 people each time. And then in Paris, we did it at part of a Nuit Blanche, which is a tech music art festival, and that was in front of about 25 people each time. And then Amsterdam, we did the Institute of Contemporary Art, which was around 15 people, because it was it was sort of at the beginning. And yeah, we've done different things. We played cinemas in London, and that we've done a lot less people, and just shows at the start, it was just shows for our friends really, and the point of it really was to say, if we're looking at it from the music industry point of view, is to say that the way a band performs and the way we distribute music and the way people consume music is changing, but in a lot of ways we're still stuck in an old mode, mostly because the music industry and the sort of myth of what being an artist or a musician or a band is so bound to a kind of I would say, a cliche about what a band is and what a label is and how you're meant to release music. That I think that it's at odds with what's happening in technology. That if you think that we make music with laptops, and that in a different way to the way we did 15 years ago, we consume music via streaming, which is different to how it was 15 years ago. But yet we still go to the concerts are still really pretty much the same. Like apart from maybe LED walls and 2-pack holograms, it's basically the same. So this was a look at how we could change both.
Let me back up then. You've been doing music for a long time.
Yeah, this is the third album that I've released, but we started a new band to be able to do this, because we realized that it was such a departure from anything we'd done before that we had to change the name and bring different people in. We had to bring coders in, people who were UX designers. It's a completely different experience. And then the music we wrote was music that was for this experience. So it's meant to be music written for virtual worlds, and it's meant to be experienced in that context.
So did you start out, could you maybe back us up into how you got started in music? You are based in the UK. You was part of your early part of music in your household, technology in your household?
Yeah, actually, that's quite a good question. My dad's a coder, software architect, and was in the 80s, in the very early days of it, and my house, everything, our clothes, our house, our cars, everything was paid for by code, really. So for me, it was never it was never a kind of a brand new thing. It's something that my dad did. Like making software it's a sort of a traditional line of work to get into. But in terms of music, I was in bands from when I was 15 or so, and
playing, singing, good.
Writing songs and playing and singing. And then I went to art school and I studied film, and so I've got a degree in film, and I made music videos and commercials. I did some videos for various bands, and I did one for Sinead O'Connor, who's a singer, for people who haven't heard of her, and then some brands and things. And then I started making music videos, and then I released some music on a small label with my band, and we did our own music videos, and then we started touring, and we released a couple of records. We did US tours and Australia, and did all the things that are lots of fun and that you're meant to do. But I kind of finished after a couple of albums of doing that, feeling like the whole experience was that everything was changing in the world, that technology was changing. My friends who were used to be in the music industry left, and they had startups and worked in the gaming industry, and their day was, every single day was different for them, and everything was new, and they were at the cutting edge of everything. And then the music industry was just this kind of stale, desperate, it's such an old-fashioned, stuck in its ways industry, and all the worst things about the music industry, like the sort of the sexism, the exploitation, the kind of obsession with novelty, and the refusal to change, is all so deeply impregnated in the music industry that I felt like, almost as a protest, that we would start something that would be using all the things that are amazing about music and live music, and all the things that are exciting about technology, and especially VR and AR and MR and AI, and try and do something new. And here's where we are.
I love your comment about the obsession with novelty, and yet not necessarily funding novelty, right? That something needs to be like something else. So you're coming in then with something that is like something else. So how do people engage with thinking about coding, VR, AR, mixed experiences? How do people approach what you're doing now, and how do you deal with both marketing novelty and funding novelty?
Well, with great difficulty.
Yeah.
in the sense that because if we were just an art project, like if we weren't supposed to be putting out a record, and like we're assigned to a brilliant label who are very progressive. And
who is your label?
We're signed to Believe, which is they were originally a digital distribution company, and they have a sub label called AllPoints, and we're published by Warp Publishing, who also have a fantastic track record of innovation and nurturing new ideas. And as much as they've been incredibly supportive, we are still, if you're a band, you're still having to operate within there's press and there's Spotify playlists and there's booking agents that would like to book you for festivals, and we're definitely a more complicated proposition than, for instance, here's the band, here's the song, that's it.
Right.
So it's why it's taken a lot longer to put a record out, because we essentially had to start a game development or a VR development company to be able to do it. But I think the advantage that we have is that we're not trying to just simply sell an app, or we're not trying to just be, oh, here's a VR experience. That there's an intention to put together something which looks at things that we could do with music and live performance that haven't been done. But also, I mean, I've said a lot of things that could be maybe misconstrued as negative about the music industry, and I'm not against the music industry in any way. I've equally got loads of negative things to say about the technology company. I'm unbiased in my negativity.
Well, let me back up half a step though. In that, the part of the challenge though is your average label is in part a bank, and banking and financing portfolios of somewhat similar output. So I know in talking with other folks who are working in AR and VR that some of the challenges that a lot of the money to come into it's been, my phrase, not theirs, stunt marketing money. So looking at a longer term economic environment for investing in some of this stuff and figuring its payoff, I'm assuming that you're funding this, not necessarily the label, to be developing all of these offshoots and alternate media properties?
Yeah. What do you mean by stunt marketing? You mean things that are kind of a PR?
Yeah, or that some brand has subsidized to, said, look at me, look at me. The novelty of the month, and not necessarily something that has both longevity and some kind of an ongoing revenue stream.
Yeah. I suppose the thing that we're doing, which I mean, we have a startup and we're going for the first round of funding, and we got a grant from the Dutch government to put on our event at the Institute of Contemporary Art. So as an art project, we've had that as a sort of support network. But the
and your startup is called
Mirocolabs, and we realized quite early on that people were coming to our shows and saying, this is great, I would love you to do something for us, and we're doing an opera, and could you do one for us? And at first we were like, well, we're kind of doing this, and we don't really, we're just working on that. And then we realized, what the hell are we talking about? Like, this is people.
Everybody needs this. Not everybody, exactly. But the cutting edge folks who would love to be part of that vocabulary.
Yeah, and I think that if we're doing this for the right reasons, and by the right reasons I mean that if this is a technology that is genuinely going to change the world and is genuinely powerful, but not only that, and I'm not saying that in just a sort of mindlessly optimistic way. There was, the internet and the industrial revolution were all things that were going to change the world and were really powerful things, and then all of them kind of got, sabotaged without sounding too much like a hippie. Like they got
monetized.
They got monetized, but they were originally, the connection is that they were originally meant to free us. They were initially, and they could have done that. An interesting example of like Edison versus Tesla, of the idea of what electricity should be. Like, should it be something that's just going to make a lot of people who are already rich much richer, or is it going to be something that could genuinely change the world for the better and create equality? And I mean, the internet's another good example. That if you, and this is what I find fascinating about especially about America, and especially about the way in the last year and a half we've had, the idea of these big superpowers, these social media and tech superpowers, and that I think the perspective is, there's these big evils of these big corporate entities that don't care about anything, and this is how we get our Trumps and our Brexits, and we get people being people being lied to and people being manipulated. And actually, if you trace back the idea behind the internet and the sort of original Silicon Valley ideology, it's a really positive, wonderful thing, which is kind of rooted in like all the best bits of what I find the best bits about American culture, that it's rooted in like hippie culture and counterculture and things that are really positive, and that in a way that got lost somewhere around the kind of .com boom idea that it's just something to make millionaires richer and to control the masses. And I think that this is why I think, as well as being incredibly excited by it, I think if you're working in it now, you almost have a responsibility or a moral obligation to say, well, this is 100% going to get used for dark, mean, horrible things. Like you can't discount the fact that there's something incredibly dystopian about VR and AR, or a potential for a very sort of Black Mirror turn of events,
or a snow crash.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that it's interesting that those books as well, that Snow Crash and that Ready Player One or whatever, they have messages in them about the potential evil that could come out of it. And I feel like if you're working in it, not only if you're an artist, if you're making games in it, or if you're creating apps for architects, that everyone has a piece of this future that they're designing, and that there's an awareness we should all have about how we can do it in an ethical, responsible, and positive way. Because ultimately, if you look at who the biggest players in this thing are, who really controls where this is going, you have Sony with their PlayStation VR, you have Oculus that's owned by Facebook, you have Vive, which is owned by one of the biggest telecommunications companies in the world. It is 100% sounds like a cyberpunk dystopia waiting to happen, that everyone's just that we're all just gonna get plugged into these things. And this is the thing I find exciting about VR. It's not that I'm just mindlessly excited about the fact that we can all go into visit these other worlds. It's how unbelievably bleak it could be. Well, it's a metaphor for everything good and everything bad about the world at the moment. That it's a metaphor for the good, because we are all now allowed to escape and build our own worlds, and we all have agency, and we're allowed to use technology so that someone from Basra could experience a interactive Harvard lecture, or a doctor could learn how to save lives, and that's all really wonderful and amazing. But in another way, well, what is it going to be? These people sitting in rooms on their own, experiencing a false reality that is a detachment from what's really going on outside, and that we gradually go further and further away. And so whatever, you can turn it one way and it's the most wonderful thing in the world that will give us all the things that political movements and religions promised us, that we'll all be one, and that we're, the ultimate hippie idea. Or it could be the worst tool that has ever been created. And I think it's that like balance between the two that means that middle area, that gray area in the middle, working on a piece of art that exists there, or that makes people ask that question, it's like a gift to be experiencing that at the moment.
So you are putting a bet on the table for the positive side of AR, VR, and in an interesting space. I mean, this is where the existing platforms often don't know what to do with a lot of this, is that when we start melding these spaces together with immersion storytelling live, which is a whole nother bizarre kettle of fish right now, that you have to figure out how to sell this. Yeah, so presently you're at small scale live blends. What is where place and partnership for what you're doing?
I'll describe what going to one of our shows is like, and then maybe I don't know, if we do a tweet about this later, I can do a link to audience reactions, because I think that is at the core of all of it, that there's people attending something and they're attending it at the same time, and it's synchronized, and it's the core of our show is that it's switching between reality and VR. So it's the fact that I think that this is what we've learned from really exploring this for 2 years and workshopping it and having this amazing luxury of being able to develop stuff every day and quit our jobs and just work on this, is that we're trying to get to the essence of not only what this technology can do, but what constitutes an effective VR, AR, immersive technology experience, and what bits of it should we avoid, and what are the kind of tropes and traps that people are falling into. So
I'm going to stop you for a second, just to do something which sadly or happily needs to be done occasionally. AR versus VR, before we get further into this, because you kind of mentioned it earlier.
Okay, I can describe.
That would be good.
Okay, so just to be more specific, because I mentioned AR and VR a few times, is that Clay Bevan, who's a really fascinating person at Google, did a talk that described the distinction between these things, which I think if anyone's wondering about what these terms mean, that's the best place to start. VR is where the entire world is occluded. So the entire world disappears and you're putting the user or the person you're building the experience for in a completely virtual space. That means that everywhere they look is in this virtual world. They can't see anything of the outside or real world. And then in the other end of the spectrum, you have reality. So you can see everything around you. And there's a grade that goes from reality to VR. So it goes from VR, and the next thing is MR, so that's mixed reality. That's where part of the world is real and part of it is virtual. Then you have AR, which is augmented reality. So the idea there is you can see everything, you can see reality, but it's augmented in the sense that the computer is tracking in a virtual space where objects are and attaching them to reality. So virtual objects are attached to the real scene around you. So there's the interesting thing that the reason I mentioned Clay Bevan is because he talks about the fact that this will all be irrelevant in about 3 or 4 years, that this distinction, that everyone has huge arguments, VR isn't as what we thought it would be, because everyone's predicted it was a $25 billion industry by 2025, and then everyone says, it's going to be about AR. Apple are famously developing the next big AR headsets, etc. And Magic Leap was the biggest funded AR, which is definitely.
Would you like to buy a Magic Leap headset for corporate now? Yeah.
So from the point of where we're using it and what's interesting about it for us is I've got a lot of we found a lot of things which are a VR sort of modes of practice that are happening, which I kind of personally think if you're going to do any VR experiences or you haven't done, these are important questions to ask yourself, which is most VR experiences, and this will upset a lot of people, I would say that nearly everyone agrees that 90% of the VR experiences you do are awful. Like, they're just terrible in the sense that they don't work in the right way. They're uncomfortable. Even the way that it's displayed or it's shown, like if you will go to a VR installation, it's strange and awkward to even put on a headset, let alone put it on a headset with people around you, let alone do that and then have a queue of people who are queuing up for their go on it. I think that one of the things that we found is that VR, to be appreciated properly, it should be like the way that cinema is appreciated. And actually there's an analogous timeline, which is that the technology of cinema, as in 25 frames a second, gives the illusion of movement, etc. And the first sort of film, or the first important films, let's say, are from Lumiere brothers to the Hitchcocks, the Lodger, to going on to Nouvelle Vague in the 60s or whatever. There's a huge gap between them, and that gap is us trying to understand how the medium works and to tell a story in it,
and building ritual and building editing and building the metaphors of
exactly the language of cinema, mm-hmm. and all the, like you said, all the other jobs that go around it. Arguably, that's going to happen a lot quicker in VR because it's just the speed of the fact that we can all operate as this hive mind now, and that all these tools are free, and you can get Unity, and people can have laptops, etc. That it's less clunky than trying to get a film.
Not necessarily free, rev share, right? So you can be creating in it, but the tools now are taking a piece of the action.
Yeah, absolutely. I just mean that if we were in 1920 and you wanted to get in movies, it would definitely not be a case of a tool that you had in your house, i.e. a laptop, and a download that you could get. Mm-hmm. You would need to, it would be complicated. Using, learning Unity, you could, on a very cheap laptop, download it tomorrow, and I, of course, eventually have to pay revenue and eventually have to do ad space, etc. But you would feasibly be able to at least enter into this as an art form. Whereas if you look at the earliest editing machines, like the earliest Steam, like you would have to study for 3.5 years to even be allowed in a room where one of those things were. So that's why I mention I'm not saying that the distance between the film technology being developed and the first like Kurosawa or whatever film being released in the cinema, we're not going to expect that amount of time to pass. It's going to happen very quickly. However, we're right at the beginning. So that's why I mentioned, at the beginning of cinema, these things were a fairground attraction where you would go and a guy in a moustache with a monocle would say, roll up and see the dancing lady for 10 seconds, and you would roll a thing. And that was film. And I think that we're slightly in that stage with VR, that it's like, it's a gimmick and an attraction at the moment. It's a very powerful one. And if you look into what it's going to do, that it's not necessarily just a game or a way of having a 3D Skype call. It's everything we're doing is going to get, in the same way that mobile phones and the internet went that way, that everything is then mediated by it, from banking to calling a cab to contacting your loved ones. I think a lot of those things are going to just logically be through immersive technology. I don't think that we're going to wear clunky headsets.
or have lenses that change our eye.
Yeah, exactly.
So you, though, are, as we started the conversation, you are bringing out a traditional album as well. Can you talk about how you are distributing more traditional music in the at the sort of one end of the spectrum of this creative properties you're building?
Yeah, well, our unique angle on it is that we're not just a VR company trying to get you to go on Steam, which is a platform by which you can buy VR experiences for your headset, and not trying to get you to just go on there and buy our app. We're a band touring music, and one of the ways, and releasing music on Spotify, etc. And one of the tools we're using to express this inexpressible thing that music is a live VR experience. So we have shows, and they're part of our tour, and you go to the place where the band is playing in a very traditional sense, like you would at a concert. But leading up to the normal concert, at the end of the day, we have VR sessions where we play one of the songs from the record, and you experience this surreal pixel audio blissful trip collectively with real people in a real room. And a lot of the exciting thing about it is that a lot of people who come to these things, they're not people who are like just tech junkies or video game aficionados or people who are into VR, and they were people who would normally not. And there's a really fascinating statistics about how few gamers have actually tried VR, and how few people have, even though you hear about it everywhere. Especially if you're working in the industry, it feels like everyone has a VR headset at home, or a room even, that they experience these things in. And that's what's the point. The point of our show is to do that, is to present a window into what's possible, rather than to say, here we are, we've arrived at a conclusive perspective on what VR is.
So are you releasing then an album?
Yeah, it's a regular album that will be released in 2020 with singles that are coming out. We've already released an EP that you can listen to on Spotify or see the videos on YouTube. The band's called Miro Shot, so it's Miroshot. And the idea is that we want the music that we've written. The songs are about technology and about mass media and social media, and that we found it was a particularly incredible tool to use that to express it, because people were leaving the shows that we did, these VR shows, and they weren't just talking about how much they liked the music, or that they enjoyed this, or they enjoyed that. They were talking about, what is this going to mean, that we're going to experience things in a different way. We've met so many fascinating people through this as well. People who are like, I'm not sure how familiar you are with Kent Bai. He also has a podcast, I think, that is I don't know what the protocol is of advertising other podcasts.
Cross promoting is always good.
Yeah, he should advertise yours, and but yeah, if you listen, he does the Voices of VR podcast, which is like a really fascinating resource for, he'll interview architects and people who have been in VR from the beginning, from the late 60s NASA sort of Damocles experiments, to people who are releasing who are part of there's the film world is a really interesting place to look at what's happening in VR, because like the gaming world that are trying to claim VR as their thing and just an extension of video games, the film world has also said and has put a very strong case for saying this is a storytelling medium. Like, we can change the world with it, and we've been making films, we've been telling stories. This is just a new tool, like a new camera and a new cinema. So, and I think that's a really interesting conflict that's going on, because the thing that's really fascinating is, and again, I don't know how many people I've upset so far, but I don't want to upset filmmakers or the film industry, and I don't want to upset the game industry, but neither of them have really got it right, in the sense that things that that made Rockstar Games the biggest company in the world, and Grand Theft Auto outsold Thriller, and it's the most consumed piece of media since the history of man began. The interesting thing is that none of these companies have really got their head around it, because the things that work in video games don't work in VR. Like, you can't run and shoot someone in VR because it's nauseating to move a character like that, and violence in VR is so much more visceral that it's actually like genuinely shocking to watch someone getting shot in front of you in a VR experience, whereas in a game you're watching a screen and it's kind of, you're just watching a little window into a world. And the same with the film industry and the music industry, that these incredible directors and auteurs picked up the idea of VR and thought, well, this is the ultimate tool for me as the godlike director. And none of the things that work, like we talked about, the language of cinema, the establishing shot, for instance. What happens in your establishing shot when you're showing a diner in Manhattan to say this is where the story is about to take place, and the audience just looks behind them because they're just interested in a pigeon that landed behind, that suddenly that doesn't work. How can you have a close-up and move someone towards someone's hands or their eyes to convey a certain emotion, when if you move a character around in VR, it really makes them sick. It brings them out of it, if anything. And that's why theatre makers, for instance, thought, well, this is our medium, because it's the idea of mise en scène. In theatre, you might look at one bit or another. It's about creating an environment. And equally, the Royal Shakespeare Company has brought out a whole VR department, and so far, nothing they've made has really grabbed anyone. And it's interesting my point of this is, it's interesting to see these enormous industries that have such a grip on their own huge lucrative industries and markets be at odds with it, and that two people can get a laptop and create something, and that beats all of those things. I think that's a really wonderful moment in time to be in.
And I would contest, though, that music is still thinking of this too, as you're working on it, that people have been putting 360 cameras in, and you get distracted by the couple making out in the back row, or exactly. That you're basically, for a lot of folks, it's we can give you a front row seat or give you a seat behind the drums or whatever, which hasn't been necessarily anything other than, in some cases, a marketed or promoted item. How do you deal with how to optimize or engage or enhance then the music experience? Let me back up to something you were saying about violence in VR, that music is in many ways transported emotion. So how do you use VR and AR to enhance, capture, or expand on the emotional sense of the music you're creating?
Well, I think enhance is a really important word, and even though I left music out of that last bit of the music industry, one of the reasons is because I feel like of all the three big industries trying to grapple with this, of film, gaming, and music, I think music is famously, the music industry, and I think there's a really important distinction, is famously terrible at adapting to technology. You just have to look at how it adapted to streaming. That while the major labels were trying to sue Metallica fans, Steve Jobs and things like Spotify and iTunes completely undercut them and pulled the rug out from under them. And now you have a music industry. There used to be 5, 6 major labels, and now there's 3, and the music industry took an enormous nosedive that it's only recovering from now. And I think that's, when you said enhance, that's definitely one of the things we've found, is that's the secret to it. Don't ever use this technology and try and replace what a live concert is. Never try and say this is better than an album or better than a concert or better than a film. Like, it's a different medium, and you should use these existing disciplines which have existed for thousands of years. When you think about it, theatre, music, performance, and just use this technology to enhance what's already there. That if it's a powerful moment in a song where it has a really visceral chorus where everyone feels together, then drop away from the VR and put everyone back in the room so they can see everyone there, because that's the whole point of a concert. If it's a moment that's very introspective and has a pulsing feeling of moving forward, then put them in a room on their own and fly them slowly towards down a corridor. And I think that's the secret of it. It's don't ever use technology for technology's sake. And I think that a lot of if you were to Google music and VR, I'm sure you'd find the sort of two approaches, which are the moment the way that there's an assumption that perhaps these are the ways of doing it. And one is like you talked about, the 360 video of the concert, which like I know I'm going to come on be as positive as I can about VR and tech, but I just can't help but be completely dismissive of that. That if that's what it is, that we're all going to go, oh, instead of going to a concert, I'm just going to sit on my own in a room, and I don't need to go to Coachella or Glastonbury or Madison Square Gardens. I'll just be in a 360 video where I can't move, I can't interact, I'm not really there, no one's there, I can't, and I'm just going to be this strange prisoner in a kind of Clockwork Orange misery of some technology and company's impression of what a concert is. It can't be that. And the other angle that people are trying to do, maybe, if you look at the most successful thing in VR at the moment, is it's a music driven game. It's the first thing to break like $18 million. It's the first thing that that is looking like, well, this is where gaming is going to, the most lucrative industry in the world is finally gonna have this migration towards VR. And it's Beat Saber, which is a game, it's a rhythm game, which is a fantastic, very well made thing. And I don't want to, the people who've made it are very talented, etc. And it's done incredibly well. So it's good for the industry, which is a term you'll depressingly hear a lot. But it's still, it's a rhythm game. It's standing on your own in a room and you do actions in time with music, which is great in its own way. That's existed in video games, but it's for me, I'm coming from it from a musician's point of view and a music point of view. I still feel like there's something that is there that we can do with this technology that harnesses the amazing things about music. And I think that VR and the things that don't work in film and gaming, and the things that I feel like have got wrong quite frequently, is that VR is a medium that is really just about the experience and being in a place. And I think that's in a way, it's the most simple and beautiful thing about it, but is the easiest things to get wrong. Is that so the VR experiences that I've done haven't, the ones that really moved me, they haven't been about killing something or getting some points or solving a puzzle, or they've been about just the sheer kind of wondrousness of being in a space, of that strange sense of vertigo from standing across a cliff, or the sense of scale from looking up at an enormous building. And weirdly, those are the most powerful bits, which is what, that which is in a way what music is. With music, it's not, you don't really understand why you love a piece of music. You just do. And there's some wonderful things written about the way that VR will bring us together. It will make us realize complex things that various, Zen, like Buddhism and religion, try to teach us, which is about being part of something larger than ourselves, about not forgetting about the material things, forgetting about, the troubles and the difficulties you have, and that you get transported or to get, it's difficult not to sound like a complete hippie when you talk about it, but that's why I don't think it's going to be about, Super Mario Brothers in VR. I don't think that's what it's meant to be for.
Well, we are nearing the end of our conversation. We are standing at the beginning of 2020. Mm-hmm. Can you share with us where you're going to be, where people might find you? I know you were saying you're going to be at South by Southwest in March of 2020. Where else will you be this year?
We're going to be at the Cannes Film Festival for Cannes XR. We're going to be playing concerts we're in Paris in February. And if you follow us on Instagram or Twitter, we'll be posting some tour dates, obviously doing regular shows and festival appearances, but then doing these special VR shows, which we actually like keeping them as small as possible so that people can experience it in these groups that are of this size, because it just makes more sense that it's kind of almost like an intimate performance rather than a big crowd of people. So if you join, if you go to miroshot.com, miroshot.com, you can sign up and join the collective. We have incredible photographers and designers, and if you want to find out more about the project, but also if you want us to help you get started in VR as a medium, we have resources, and we regularly post things like tutorials and interesting things that we've spotted. So we're really excited to sort of share this stuff.
And any last things we didn't mention you want to make sure that our listeners have heard about?
No, I'd like to end on a message. I feel like I've wanted to make sure that there's a positive note.
Understood.
Yeah, the really, it's the if you're an artist or if you're a photographer or if you don't even know if you're an artist or not, that this is one of the most exciting times in recent history to be getting into this, because if you get into film now, there have already been the Hitchcocks and the Kurosawas. If you get into music, there's already been the David Bowies and the Dre's. But at the moment, it's anyone's game, and it's I think the real masterpieces will come from places we don't imagine it. So I would urge anyone who's excited by it and interested in it to get involved, and if we can help in any way, then they just need to message us and we'll point them in the right direction.
Excellent. Thank you for joining us. Well, that wraps up this podcast. Many thanks to the UCLA Herb Alpert School of Music and the UCLA Center for Music Innovation for being our hosts of this ongoing series. You can subscribe to us in all the usual places, or you can come find us at innovation.schoolofmusic.ucla.edu. Join us again to follow the other adventures that we will be tracking down in innovating music. Thanks again.